written 2 books on the Labour Party. You've been chair of the Labour list. You've donated over £30,000 in the last few years to Labour candidates. I mean, you are effectively Labour Party aristocracy. We're joined by David Kogan, OBE, who is the government's preferred candidate for the chair of the new independent football regulator.
Mr. Kogan, there has been widespread concern since the announcement of your appointment about your close ties to the Labour Party. What reassurances can you give this committee that the regulator will remain completely independent of government?
I'm very glad that question has been asked, and I'm glad to put it absolutely on the public record of my personal independence. My independence both of individual groups within football and my absolute independence of political control. I have been a donor to the Labour Party. I have been utterly transparent about it. In fact, I mean, I've been transparent to the point where things that have been written about me that actually some have been accurate, some have been wholly inaccurate, but actually they haven't actually discovered all that I have done as a donor to the Labour Party. And I'm prepared to declare now on the public record that 5 years ago I contributed very small sums of money to both the leadership campaigns of the Labour Party of both Sir Keir Starmer and of Lisa Nandy. That hasn't been discovered by the press, so I'm happy to declare it now. But I did those donations, and I did those donations to individual parliamentary candidates, none of whom were MPs, in the belief that actually having a leadership battle within the Labour Party with 2 seasoned candidates was a good thing, not a bad thing, in the belief that you actually want to have good parliamentary candidates to fill good parliamentary seats. And I have never actually been particularly close to any of the individuals to whom I have donated money. So I have total personal independence from all of them.
Did you discuss your application with any members of the current government?
No. No, I mean, obviously I was first approached by the previous government.
You seem a little perturbed by or puzzled by the suggestion of political bias, Mr. Kogan. I mean, you've written 2 books on the Labour Party. You've been chair of the Labour list. You've donated over £30,000 in the last few years to Labour candidates. I mean, you are effectively Labour Party aristocracy. So I think being accused of there being a perceived bias is not an unreasonable suggestion. That bias is out there. I mean, whether you like it or not, it's there. So what are you going to do to address it? How are you going to settle that down and make sure that from day one you do so, getting rid of any of this allegations that you're in the pocket of the Prime Minister?
If I appear to be puzzled or dismissive of your question, that was absolutely not my intention. Quite the contrary. I'm glad you asked it, and it has to be addressed. I completely accept that. I mean, just to be clear, I have never had a one-on-one meeting with Keir Starmer. I've never met Keir Starmer since he's become Prime Minister, literally. Not been in a room with him. So I am not, I mean, I must say, I've never in my life been described as being aristocracy of any type, let alone Labour aristocracy. So I'm not quite entirely sure how to respond to that. But I recognise there is a perception, and let's be clear, it's not bias, it's a perception of bias. And the way that you correct a perception is by action and by delivery and by being transparent and by being held to account. All of those things I absolutely pledge to you I will be. I absolutely am happy to be accountable to all of you, to come back to this committee as frequently as you wish me to be, and if you see any sense of political prejudice coming through in any of the decisions I'm taking as chair of the regulatory authority, then I've no doubt they will be highlighted by you and by everybody else. But it's simply, I have to give you my personal assurance. It's really all I can do is give you a personal assurance that this is not my first public appointment. I was on the board of the Foreign Office Trading Fund for 8 years, appointed by a minister both under Labour and Conservative ministers. I was chairman of a further education college, very close to here in Vincent Square, working with Labour and Conservative ministers. And 3 years ago, I was appointed by Mrs. Doris, a Conservative Secretary of State, to be on the board of Channel 4. So I have been through public appointments processes before under both parties. And when in April of last year, DCMS advertised for the post of chair, I didn't apply. And on May the 16th last year, which was the day applications closed, I received a phone call from the permanent secretary of the department asking me why I hadn't applied. And the reason she was phoning me, apparently, was that a number of candidates they'd approached, or putative candidates, had said that they thought I would be a better candidate. And the reason I hadn't applied was that I had 2 books written on the Labour Party. I was on the board of Labour List. And I'd also, both of which, by the way, had already happened when Mrs. Dorris appointed me to Channel 4, so I was known to have had that background. But in the intervening period, I'd also given money as a donor to a number of parliamentary candidates. And I said to the Permanent Secretary, I'm not entirely sure that a Conservative government would necessarily welcome my candidacy. She said, actually, your professional background is such that we think we'd like you to be a candidate, but I will go and check. And she went away, and at 10 o'clock that night called me again and said, you are clear to run. I don't know who she talked to, but I had been given absolute clearance as a candidate, rather admirably actually, by the government to run. And so they reopened applications for me. I duly applied that weekend and then flew off to America to what I thought was going to be the big political event of the following week, which was the Trump-Biden debate for my client CNN. Little did I know that Mr. Sunak was going to call the election the following Wednesday, and this whole process went into abeyance. So there was then a suspension of this process over the course of the following months, an interminable wait. And it got to the autumn, and I was still nominally a candidate. I'd heard very little from the department in that period. And a number of things happened. The first in my own professional life was that the presidential election was taking place, and I was spending a lot of time in America. The second was that another client of mine is the New York Times. I'm heavily embedded in the issues of AI and copyright in America, which I've been taking a lot of time to do in America. And the third was that I was negotiating on behalf of the Women's Super League their media rights deals, and had been heavily immersed in trying to create a future for the Women's Super League. And there was also a lot of noise going around about Labour donors, as you might recall. Not about the sort of donor I was, donor to local parliamentary candidates, but different types of donations. And I decided that actually it had gone on too long, I was too busy, and I withdrew from the process. That was last autumn. In March of this year, the Permanent Secretary called me for the second time in my life, this time under a Labour government, and asked me whether I was prepared to be a candidate again. And this time, the election was over in America, AI was continuing, obviously the Women's Super League deals had been done, I was much more free, but also I was much more interested in the job because the job, as time has gone by, the job has become more pressing and more important to the world of football. So I said I was available, and I then had to go through, and was happy to go through, the full process as other candidates had done earlier in the year.
You don't strike me as the sort of person who does things just because someone asks you to or tells you to. So what made you want to apply for this?
Well, let's be clear about the importance of this role and the importance of the role of football. Since I first was involved in football, since 1999, and I'm very happy to talk about my professional background in football, which is extensive, football has gone from being an important part of this country's culture to a critical part of this country's culture. And it works on a whole series of levels. It works on the level of sporting competition, it works as a series of business levels, and remarkably has grown and developed as a business. I mean, one of the interesting things about League One last weekend was of the 6 teams that are now both being promoted and qualifying for the playoffs, 5 of them are now owned by very vigorous overseas owners. That would have been inconceivable 20 years ago. So football itself as a business is radically changing. But also, football as a community and as a part of, a town's soul has become almost more important. And when we look at clubs such as Southend, which has been through 18 HMRC winding up petitions and survived them, when we look at what happened to Bury, I think the job is incredibly important, and I think I'm qualified to do it. I've worked for the Premier League, I've worked for the Football League, I've worked for the Scottish Premier League, I've worked for UEFA, and I spent the last 6 years working for the Women's Super League. So I don't think many people in the world of football have got all those points of the compass.
Which club do you support?
Tottenham. Sorry. I seem to run into nothing but Arsenal fans these days, but I have been a Tottenham fan since 1964. Within this bill, there are considerable regulations and considerable provisions made for fans to engage with their clubs. And the reason that that is critical, not just in terms of understanding the kind of financing of a club or the nature of an ownership of the club, is without the fans, the clubs don't exist, number one. But more importantly, the fans act as a firewall and a brake on what owners are doing, and on understanding the future. And actually, if you're going to regulate, if you're going to have an understanding of the future of football, if you're going to have an understanding of where the clubs and the spirit of the clubs are going to go, you have to have the fans involved.